How is the new NBA rule going? What's actually happened with it? Can you just explain it and how it's affected fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest rule so far has been the increased emphasis on, foul baiting or ref baiting, as it's been called in recent years, which is essentially players like James Harden, Trae Young come to mind, even Chris Paul, guys who are, deliberately essentially trying to draw fouls, whether that means, you're pinning a defender's arm and kind of flailing your arms, you're not jumping straight up and down. If you're shooting a three-pointer, jumping into defenders, over the last few years, especially, those calls have overwhelmingly been granted to shooters.
So with changes in fantasy values, yes, we all expect that players to adapt, but that does create some trade opportunities. So after the first almost month of the season, there are some players that are over delivering their projection and that you maybe expect to come back to earth. Players that we could trade away. Who are the players that you're looking to sell in fantasy basketball?
Well, the first name that comes to mind, Alan, is Al Horford in Boston. Right now, if you look at 9-category Roto rankings for the season, he's the 7th ranked player in per game value right now. Needless to say, that's about 100 spots higher than a lot of people were drafting him just a few weeks ago. So it's been a really nice resurgence for Al Horford. But if you look at his rebounding numbers, his blocks numbers, that's really what's buoying his fantasy value right now. Neither of those to me are sustainable based on what we've seen from Al Horford throughout his career. He's at 10.1 rebounds per game. That would be his highest since 2012-13 when he was smack dab in the middle of the prime of his career. He hasn't been anywhere near that for the better part of the last decade. And he's at 3 blocks per game right now. And that's really the main reason why he ranks so highly thus far. But if you check the rankings and you see Al Horford in the top 10, something smells a little fishy.
Let's give fantasy gamers some actionable advice with this. Who's a player that you think they could trade for, give Al Horford away, sell him on his big start, everything like you just said?
I mean, you're looking at someone maybe like a Clint Capella, someone who's, he was on a minutes limit to begin the year. He's someone I always like rostering on my teams, even though he hurts you a little bit in free throw percentage. He doesn't take a ton of free throws, so he doesn't necessarily kill you there. But you can bank on the volume rebounds. You can bank on the high field goal percentage. You can bank on the blocks. And he's someone that, kind of has an artificial ceiling. Like, he's never going to be a top 10 or probably even a top 20 guy. Right. In fantasy, he's always going to kind of hang out in that like 40 to 60 range.
I think that's key. I think that the actionable advice there, and I like that you're not swinging for the fences when you want to trade out Horford. You want to maybe even just hit a single or double with him. Right. I think that's a really smart fantasy strategy that our watchers could use. Okay, who's the next player that's been overperforming that you're looking to move off your roster and maybe recoup some value for?
Yeah, Harrison Barnes, to me. This is a guy who was once the number 1 player in his high school class. So maybe, 12 years later, he's finally delivering on that potential. We have to keep that possibility in mind. But I do not see Harrison Barnes as the 15th most valuable player in fantasy basketball this year. And that's what he's ranked so far. He's been fantastic. He got off to an amazing start as a 3-point shooter. That's really what's pushed his value this far up. He's currently at 47% from beyond the arc. Obviously, that's not sustainable. He can probably hang out around 40%. So you're not looking at a guy who's going to go all the way down to like 30, 35. He can still be very valuable, but 47%, I mean, that's like historic level of 3-point shooting. He's not a must sell for me by any means, but if you can get a higher upside player or a player with a more proven track record for Barnes, I say you do it. I say you capitalize now, because I think in a week or two from now, he's going to kind of slowly go maybe like fall by like 2 to 3 spots every single week.
Give us one more player that's over delivering right now on the player radar.
Jonas Valanciunas is currently 12th in 9-category per game value. Off to an amazing start, 2nd in the NBA in rebounding behind only Rudy Gobert, who's always right up there. He has 7 straight double-doubles heading into the weekend. He's playing a ton of minutes, however, almost 6 more minutes per game than he averaged last season in Memphis. So at some point, to me, that's probably not going to be sustainable. This is not a player who's played, deep into like the mid-30s in minutes throughout his career. He's usually sat in the mid to high 20s. So there's not a lot of precedent for him doing that over a long sample.
And since you watched this video into the end, Nick, let's give them one bonus player that they could trade away, get them off your roster because they're over-delivering what you expected them to do.
I almost feel like I'm contractually required to mention that Carmelo Anthony is currently a top 40 player in 9-category fantasy leagues. It's been one of the most fun stories, I guess, of the season so far. But he's basically riding a few really hot games to that top 40 ranking. That's just not the player he is anymore. It's not remotely close to the player that we've seen over the last few years at any of his previous stops credit to Melo for kind of shifting into this second phase of his career as a really nice role player. He's not a top 40 fantasy player. If there's somebody in your league who believes that for some reason this is sustainable or is like a lifelong Carmelo Anthony fan, absolutely. If you can get anything of proven like top 80, top 90 value for Carmelo Anthony right now, absolutely pull the trigger.
To see all of our fantasy basketball content, click the link in the video description below. If it's behind our premium wall, you could try RotoWire right now for 10 days free. Just go to rotowire.com/try.